Hi, everybody. So I'm going to try to use the 50 minutes that I have wisely. Just as an update, we just got acquired by Reed Elsevier about 2 months ago. So we're not in that sense a typical startup anymore, but we're being given the freedom to accelerate on our vision that we have had since our early days. So what is Mendeley? Mendeley, in effect, is one of the world's largest research collaboration platforms, and it actually has turned into an open ecosystem of academic research. And what that means is something I'm going to explain to you now. We started Mendeley as a group of 3 PhD students who had trouble organizing PDF documents. So when you do a lot of scientific research, very quickly you have hundreds, if not thousands, of academic papers that you have to read and you have to annotate and you have to make sense of and you have to connect and so forth. And over a course of very few weeks, that gets very overwhelming. And then you have different projects and you have to work with different people together. So that was a big problem. At the same time, we saw in other industries there were very cool social sharing services and super innovative technologies, Facebook, Twitter, Flickr, all this kind of stuff, but nothing was happening in the world of science and scientific research. So we said, okay, why can't we combine these two thoughts and say, well, actually, let's try to find something that solves our problem in a way that it has solved the problem in a very similar way, but in other industries. Why can't we adapt that? And that's what we did. We developed a tool that you can install on your computer. It runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux. We have mobile apps. It has a web app. And you drag and drop your PDF documents that you have on your hard disk. You drag and drop that in there. And what we then do is Mendeley extracts that data from the PDF documents and builds up a structured database. So we try to figure out what is the title, what is the year of publication, who is the author, and so forth and so forth. So that very quickly, when you drag and drop hundreds of PDF documents, you have a structured database where you almost don't need to do anything anymore. As a next step, we then have a built-in PDF viewer, so you don't need to print out the PDFs anymore. PDF is unfortunately still a very archaic way of displaying information, specifically because it loses all the structured information. People make annotations on the printouts, so we allow that to be all in digital format where you can make highlights and sticky notes within the PDF. And then, obviously, as the next step, if you've solved that for yourself as a productivity problem, we then allow people to share that amongst a group of colleagues. So if you're working on a paper together with other colleagues because you need to publish, which researchers need to do, or because you need to understand research papers for your own research project, then you couldn't do that collaboratively. And then following the productivity and the collaboration step is then the last piece of kind of what makes Mendeley this ecosystem and drives this ecosystem, which is we aggregate all this information that's going on in these individual and collaborative databases. We aggregate all that stuff, all that activity, anonymize it, and then display it for public, make it available for other people to reuse and do stuff with it. And I'm going to speak about that in a second. The interesting thing is what you can then do is you can basically see who is interacting with what type of content. And in a very practical fashion, you might be able to identify what is the most read paper right now in computer science. Meaning if you abstract that, what is the most important or most discussed topic in computer science or in biochemical research and so forth. So we aggregate and harvest all that data that's going on in the academic world, push it out into public, and allow people to reuse that data and build something exciting on top of that. This is a screenshot of Mendeley Desktop. Very practical, again, useful tool. It really plugs into the productivity, into the workflow of the individual researcher. You have a list of papers, you have collections, groups, tags, and so forth. Here again, a screenshot of the PDF viewer with highlights and annotations. And because what we did solved the problem of so many researchers in that world, we got a lot of emails from scientists and PhD students and postdocs who said, well, what you're doing is awesome. How can I tell more people about it? So we built a community program, an advisor program, which is around the world where we have volunteer advisors, we call them Mendeley advisors, who have to apply to become a local representative for Mendeley on their campus. And they do that for free, which is a fantastic marketing channel, but they also have a say in our development roadmap, and we provide them with up-to-date information on what we're actually doing. But it's a fantastic community approach to what we're doing. And again, proof to the pudding is user love. It's a snapshot of some of the Twitter feedback that we get. And there are things like, I love Mendeley. It brings the fun back to science. Or somebody says, Mendeley is the bomb for academic gangsters looking to blow it up all raw-like. So the funny thing is, when we started, okay, let's develop some software. But what we're actually doing is we're doing much more. We're actually creating a movement of open science. We are piggybacking on really helping to solve a problem, but we are creating a movement for open science because this is something that matters to people. Why is this important from an industry perspective, and where is actually the game-changing element in here? So if you look at the industry, you might think you have a lot of content that is being pushed out into the industry from academic publishers, which usually comes out in the form of these academic papers. It's massive. It's a massive amount. It's hugely valuable, but it's a lot. So what people have done then is, either the publishers themselves or service providers started to try to enrich that information via providing semantic interlinking. So you try to automatically parse a paper and try to identify concepts, elements, tools, ingredients, genes, whatever, and try to connect that amongst the papers. So you have an automatically interlinked system of papers. So this is what I call the semantic or metadata layer. But where we are tapping is even one layer beyond that, which is we are trying to capture the social layer. So everything that in a social context is going around that specific item of communication, which is the scientific paper. So who works with it? In collaboration with whom? How often? What else do they read? Where are they? What is their discipline? And so forth. Which pages within the paper are they reading? Where are the most highlights and annotations? So ideally you will get to a point that you could display heat maps for paper. So you have a 30-page paper, but you only have half an hour. So where are the pages that you need to read? Now this is the world today, but what happens if tomorrow, like in many other industries, that social layer becomes the dominant driver for content discovery and how people work with each other, how people consume content? And how can we then in turn leverage that actually to produce something and allow people to create more value, create more stuff? And this is something that really does matter to publishers, that does matter to the big companies in the world that are in scientific research, and I guess that's one of the reasons why we are now part of Reed Elsevier. So this role of social, very practical. This was a conceptual view, but very practical. As I mentioned earlier, there are all these great companies using and leveraging kind of technologies that piggyback on social information. So Amazon, people who have bought and read that book also have bought that book. Very simple concept, collaborative filtering. iTunes Genius, also it's not rocket science in that sense, but nobody has done this for scientific research until Mendeley came up. So we've developed a system that we call Mendeley Suggest, which just looks at your library and compares your library across our user base of roughly 2.5 million users and says, okay, there is somebody who has a very similar library who added those 10 papers in the last week. Maybe some of these are interesting to you as well. What you can then do is you can obviously continue to refine that, and you say you'd only try to do recommendation on a selection of papers or only on the most recent ones and so on. There are endless possibilities. Facebook newsfeed, I don't need to explain to anybody what that is. Mendeley newsfeed, very simple concept, just adapt that, allow collaboration, so people add a document to a group and then a conversation starts around that document and allow people to exchange information based on that. Facebook and all the other tools are not geared towards that professional industry of scientific research, but it's in a conceptual view very similar. This shows you an overview page of what is going on Mendeley, within Mendeley's ecosystem around the topic of biological sciences, for example. It tells you, for example, what are the most popular groups, and then you can go into those groups and discover other people, discover other papers. You see what are the most popular papers for that specific topic, what are the tags that people assign to papers in that discipline, and then you can, again, via social discovery, click on certain tags and then link out to more papers that otherwise would not be cited or linked or so forth. And you can obviously also see academic researchers in that field. Social, why is it important? Again, is you have big guys, Facebook introducing graph search, Google is trying to enhance its search with social features and social functionalities. At the same time, tools that don't embrace successfully the concept of social they will fade. And so what I think is very important is that it's becoming more and more critical to embrace and master this kind of social proof and people's desire to share in order to succeed. Now we have social, but social can really be enabled via openness. And I would think in our industries, publishers have not really excelled at being open. That is due to several factors, but I actually think that if we become more open in that industry, we can actually increase the value for everybody. One example here is, so you can see in that screenshot, this is a blog, personal blog of a professor, and that professor curates a reading list with Mendeley, but we then allow that reading list to be embedded somewhere else. So it doesn't need to happen on Mendeley. What the result is then, you see 11 comments, the conversation, the scientific conversation is then actually going on somewhere else, but it happens only because we help people to share that content, right? And that is something good inherently, but it also means that we create value, because if we help people to create these conversations, they will always come back to Mendeley. The other piece to it is what we need is atomization of content in that specific industry. And I would imagine that other publishing or content producing industries face a similar challenge. In our industry, we have this one clunky piece of information, which is the PDF document. But the PDF document is very difficult to tear apart, right? You have figures in there, you have the references, you have maybe tables, you have an abstract, you have different chapters, but it comes in one clunky PDF. And I think we need to think around how do we make that PDF more shareable in more granular forms, and to allow this sharing. How we embrace openness is mainly via providing an open API to our data. So as I mentioned earlier, we aggregate all that data anonymously, so we regard people's privacy. But we allow people to, for example, query a title for an academic paper, and then we provide back what are related papers, what is the readership for that paper, what is the social context around that paper. A practical application, how we can then push that back into kind of the broader audience, this is an example where you have a New York Times article page, and you see on the top right-hand corner, we have a Chrome plugin. So you can click that plugin, and that plugin, by the way, has been developed by somebody else, not necessarily by Mendeley. So that Chrome plugin accesses Mendeley's API, sends the title, so the header of that page to Mendeley, and Mendeley, because we have a recommendation engine, delivers back relevant research for that topic. And I'm not sure if you can read that, but actually the research papers that are being suggested as further reading are actually quite relevant to that. So if I'm reading something and I want to read up and follow up a little bit more hardcore research, then I can use this tool. I can use Mendeley. And I think that is what is in our mission, that we actually break up the divide between academia and the rest of the world and help people discover more of that stuff. Another example of an application, again, that hasn't been developed by Mendeley ourselves, but by somebody else who uses our data, is a tool, it's obviously still prototype, but it's called Clank. And what that tool allows is connection between papers, and then you can assign a value to that connection. So unlike citations, which don't tell you why somebody cites another paper until you actually read within the text why that citation happened, in a way like this, you can actually say, okay, this paper supports that or rejects. And it's basically a semantically interlinked system of papers that we crowdsource to our 2 million users. And the last example to demonstrate where we try to add value via being very, very open, in the US, there are a couple of services that let you analyze your own DNA. So you go there and you get results based on the structure of your DNA and whatever. And this is a tool that then relates the results from that DNA analysis to actual research papers. For example, you might actually discover maybe your specific DNA is at risk for Alzheimer's, or that you're at risk of Alzheimer's because of your specific DNA going forward. And I, again, think that is very relevant, not only for the academics, but for the broader world. We've been very successful at doing that. So here you can see the API calls. It's kind of skyrocketing. And I think we want to go ahead and really push forward with that now, even more so together with Reed Elsevier. So why do we think that really matters? There was a very famous talk of Tim Berners-Lee, who said all the time we're very conscious of the huge challenges that human society has now, curing cancer, understanding the brain for Alzheimer's, But a lot of the state of knowledge of the human race is sitting in the scientists' computers and is currently not shared. We need to get it unlocked so we can tackle those huge problems, and that is exactly what we're trying to do. Thank you.